The rain splattered against the kitchen window as I stared at my coffee, the liquid swirling into an abyss of uncertainty. Claire, my wife of 10 years, hung softly at the counter, her reflection a blur in the glass. She was as radiant as ever, her blonde hair tied in a loose bun and her green eyes glinting with casual ease. But the air around us felt colder, more distant. For weeks, something had been off, a subtle shift in her demeanor that made my instincts twitch. I tried to push it aside, chalking it up to stress from her job, but a gnawing doubt had rooted itself deep within me. It wasn't until that Thursday morning that everything began to unravel. The day started like any other. The kids were rushing to pack their lunches, Claire was dashing around in her tailored suit, and I was juggling a cup of coffee and the morning news. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a habit she'd been curiously diligent about lately, always ensuring it was face down. I stole a glance at the name flashing on the screen, William. A harmless name, a harmless message, I told myself. But the casual tone of her conversations with this William had started to raise flags. "Who's William?" I asked, my tone deliberately light. She didn't flinch, didn't miss a beat. "Oh, William Fellows, my regional manager. We've been working on the new account for weeks." "Why?" "No reason," I replied, but my gut churned. That evening, as Claire prepared for another business trip, I decided to clean out her car. It was an innocent task, one I'd done countless times before. But as I reached beneath the passenger seat to retrieve a stray water bottle, my hand brushed against something unfamiliar. Pulling it out, I froze, a box of protection. My mind raced, trying to rationalize its presence, but there was no justification that made sense. My hands trembled as I pocketed the box, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't confront her immediately. Confrontation would lead to lies, deflections, and anger. I needed something more than suspicion, I needed the truth. The next few days passed in a haze of suspicion and careful planning. Claire left for her trip, her goodbyes as sweet and casual as ever, though I noticed a flicker of guilt in her eyes. That night, I installed a GPS tracker on her phone. The decision felt wrong, invasive even, but my instinct screamed louder than my conscience. If I was wrong, I could live with being the paranoid husband. But if I was right? The tracker became my lifeline, illuminating a world I hadn't been prepared for. Claire's business trips often concluded at a secluded cabin 2 hours away. The same cabin. Always with William. The first time I confirmed her location, I wanted to drive there, to catch her in the act. But something inside me, perhaps the need for meticulous clarity, held me back. I wasn't ready to blow it all up just yet. Instead, I began gathering evidence. Every breadcrumb, every scrap of digital data she left behind, I collected and archived. Emails exchanged under the guise of work, blurred photos uploaded to her private cloud, and even mundane details like her hotel bookings. It was all there, painting a picture of betrayal in vivid strokes. During this time, Claire continued to play her part flawlessly. Her affection was as warm as ever, her demeanor unchanged. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her lies. But knowledge is a heavy burden. Every kiss, every touch, felt like a mockery of what we once had. As the days turned to weeks, my anger began to crystallize into resolve. I could have confronted her, should have, perhaps, but the idea of a quiet, private breakup felt inadequate. Her betrayal had been brazen, her deceit meticulous. My response needed to be equally bold. Claire's birthday was approaching, and I knew it was the perfect stage. We always celebrated her birthday with friends and family, a lively affair filled with laughter and champagne. This year, I decided to give her a gift she wouldn't forget. The preparations were meticulous. I hired a private investigator to supplement my findings, ensuring every detail was airtight. I compiled the evidence into a presentation, something that would leave no room for denial. And I invited William to the party, Claire's co-conspirator, her secret lover. It was a risky move, but necessary. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment. On the surface, I played the role of the doting husband, smiling through clenched teeth and pretending everything was fine. Claire didn't suspect a thing. Her charm and confidence blinded her to the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. Every time she laughed, every time she leaned in to kiss me, I felt the weight of my plan press down harder. The betrayal would end, but not quietly. The morning of the party, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. The reflection staring back at me was someone I barely recognized, calm, collected, and seething beneath the surface. Tonight would be the night everything changed. The living room glowed with soft candlelight, the hum of conversation filling the air as friends and family trickled in for Claire's birthday celebration. Laughter echoed off the walls, mingling with the clink of glasses and the faint melody of a jazz playlist I'd curated just for the occasion. I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting guests, pouring drinks, and making sure every detail was perfect. Tonight had to be seamless, no one could suspect a thing. Claire was radiant, the center of attention in a burgundy dress that hugged her figure in all the right ways. She floated between conversations, her laughter ringing like a bell, the perfect image of a beloved wife and hostess. If I hadn't known better, I might have been fooled by the act. But every glance she shared with William across the room, every fleeting touch of their hands, was a dagger in my chest. William stood near the bar, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He was handsome in an obvious way, his tailored suit and polished shoes broadcasting wealth and power. Watching him sip his whiskey, I felt the rage simmering beneath my carefully constructed facade. He didn't belong here, among my friends, in my home. But tonight, he'd learned just how unwelcome he truly was. The party was well underway when I slipped upstairs to retrieve the hard drive containing my carefully curated presentation. It sat on my desk, innocuous yet potent, holding the culmination of weeks of surveillance and painstaking preparation. As I held it in my hand, a wave of doubt washed over me. Was this too much? Too public? But the memory of her betrayal, of every deceitful word and stolen moment, steeled my resolve. She had made her choices, now, it was time for the consequences. Back downstairs, the atmosphere was electric. I stepped into the middle of the room, raising my glass for a toast. Conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to me. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, thank you for being here tonight to celebrate Claire. She is, without a doubt, the love of my life, the mother of our children, and someone who deserves the very best. And tonight, I'd like to give her something truly special. Claire's smile faltered for just a second, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She didn't know, but she could sense it, an undercurrent of something deeper in my words. I set my glass down and moved to the TV mounted on the wall. With the press of a button, the screen lit up, and the room dimmed. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the first image appeared, a grainy photograph of Claire and William entering the cabin together. What the hell is this? Claire's voice cut through the silence, sharp and panicked. I ignored her, letting the images speak for themselves. A video followed, a short clip of them walking arm in arm, their laughter and whispered words captured by a hidden camera I'd arranged through the private investigator. The evidence was damning, undeniable. The room erupted into chaos. Claire, I said, my voice calm and deliberate, do you want to explain this? Or should I continue? Her face flushed crimson, her eyes darting to William, who stood frozen, his glass halfway to his lips. The confidence he'd exuded earlier evaporated, replaced by the unmistakable look of a man caught red-handed. This isn't what it looks like, Claire stammered, her voice shaking. Mark, please, can we talk about this privately? Privately? I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. You had no problem making your betrayal public. Why should I grant you the courtesy of privacy now? The guests shifted uncomfortably, some murmuring their shock, others too stunned to react. William placed his glass down with a heavy clink and stepped forward. "Mark," he began, his voice low and placating, "let's not do this here. Let's talk man to man." "Man to man?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You dare to talk about being a man while sleeping with another man's wife?" "No, William, there's nothing left to discuss. You've made your choices." The tension in the room was palpable, every eye fixed on us. Claire tried to grab my arm, tears streaming down her face, but I shook her off. "You don't get to cry now, Claire," I said coldly. "You don't get to play the victim." The party dissolved into chaos. Some guests left in haste, muttering apologies and excuses, while others stayed, too captivated by the unfolding drama to leave. I turned to Claire one last time. "I'll have your things packed by tomorrow," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You can pick them up while the kids are at school. I won't have them witnessing this mess." "Mark, please," she began, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't," I snapped. "You've said enough." I left the room, ignoring the stunned faces of our guests and the muffled sobs of my wife. Upstairs, I locked the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. The plan had gone off without a hitch, but the victory felt bitter. Downstairs, the party fizzled out. I could hear Claire and William arguing in hushed tones, the sound of chairs scraping and doors closing. When the house finally fell silent, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The morning after the storm, the house felt eerily quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm coffee, staring at the faint sunlight streaming through the blinds. The events of the previous night played on a loop in my mind, Claire's shock, William's cowardice, and the stunned silence of our friends. The images should have brought satisfaction, vindication, but all I felt was a heavy emptiness. Upstairs, the sound of hurried footsteps and rustling bags echoed faintly. Claire was packing. True to my word, I'd given her the morning to collect her things before the kids came home. She hadn't tried to talk to me, hadn't begged for forgiveness, not yet. The woman I'd exposed the night before had been stripped of her charm, her confidence, reduced to a husk of the partner I once knew. I couldn't bring myself to go upstairs and see her. What could I say? What more was there to explain? The evidence had been clear, her betrayal undeniable. Still, the years of our life together, the good times, clung to me like a phantom. For every moment of her infidelity, there had been 1,000 moments of laughter, intimacy, and love. Were they all lies? The sound of Claire descending the stairs broke my thoughts. She carried 2 suitcases, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her clothes hung loosely, as though she'd aged 10 years overnight. She set the suitcases down by the door and looked at me for the first time. "Mark," she said softly, her voice hoarse, "can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. Finally, I set the mug down and met her gaze. "What is there to talk about?" I asked, my tone flat. "You made your choices, Claire. You chose him." Her lips trembled, and she sank into the chair opposite me. "I didn't choose him," she said, barely above a whisper. "I didn't choose anything. It just happened." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "It just happened. That's what you're going with? Claire, you lied to me for months, years, maybe. You made calculated decisions to betray me. Don't insult me by pretending it was some accident." Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped her hands together, as though praying for forgiveness. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But please, Mark, don't throw everything away. We can fix this. We can try." Her words hit me harder than I expected. There was a time when those words, that plea, would have melted my anger. But now, they felt like empty echoes of a life I no longer recognized. Fix this, I repeated, leaning forward. Claire, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the trust, the foundation of our marriage. You didn't just make a mistake, you made a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie, to betray, to prioritize your selfish desires over our family. She sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking. I didn't mean to. Stop, I interrupted, my voice sharp. You meant to. You planned it. Every trip, every lie, was deliberate. And now you want me to forgive you? To pretend it never happened? Her tears fell silently, and she nodded. Yes, she whispered. For the kids. For us. Please, Mark. I'll do anything. The mention of our children struck a chord. Emma and Ben, our two bright, wonderful children, were the innocent victims in all of this. They didn't deserve the fallout of their mother's betrayal. But could I sacrifice my self-respect, my sanity, for their sake? Could I live with the knowledge of her infidelity gnawing at me every day? I stood, pushing the chair back with a screech. You should go, I said coldly. The kids will be home soon, and I don't want them to see this. Claire didn't move. She stared at me, her face crumpling with despair. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. Don't throw me away. I'm not throwing you away, Claire, I replied, my voice heavy with finality. You threw us away. Now go. For a moment, she hesitated, as though hoping I might change my mind. But when I didn't waver, she stood and grabbed her suitcases. At the door, she paused, her hand trembling on the knob. I love you, Mark, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned my back to her and stared out the window, watching the world outside carry on, oblivious to the wreckage of my life. When the door finally clicked shut, a weight lifted from my chest, only to be replaced by a hollow ache. Claire was gone. The house was mine again, but it felt emptier than ever. I sat back at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched mug of coffee. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would come later, in the silence of the night, when the weight of it all became unbearable. For now, I sat in the stillness, letting the emptiness settle over me. The days after Claire left were surreal. The house felt different, quieter, yet charged with an unfamiliar tension. I threw myself into work and routines with the kids, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But the silence in the evenings was oppressive, and the memories of Claire's betrayal loomed like a shadow over every moment. I avoided our mutual friends, knowing they would be buzzing with the fallout of the party. I could already hear the whispered judgments, the pitying looks, the inevitable gossip. But I didn't care. My world had shrunk to a handful of simple priorities: my children, my sanity, and moving forward. One evening, about 2 weeks after Claire left, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, unmarked except for my name scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Mark. There are things you don't know. Meet me at 7 p.m. tonight at the Overlook Cafe. Come alone. No signature. No explanation. I stared at the note, my pulse quickening. Who had sent it? Claire. William? Or someone else entirely? A part of me wanted to toss the letter in the trash, to avoid reopening the wounds that had barely begun to heal. But curiosity and a simmering anger drove me to comply. If there were more truths to uncover, I needed to know. At 7 p.m. sharp, I walked into the Overlook Cafe. The place was nearly empty, the dim lighting casting long shadows over the tables. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on a figure in the corner. A woman, her back to me, her posture stiff. As I approached, she turned. My breath caught. It wasn't Claire. It was a woman I didn't recognize, late 30s, with sharp features and piercing green eyes. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Mark," she said, her voice low but firm. "Thank you for coming." "Who are you?" I asked, wary. "My name is Lydia," she said. "And I think we have a mutual interest, William Fellows." At the mention of his name, my stomach tightened. "Go on," I said, folding my arms. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "William has a habit of interfering in marriages. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But what you need to know is that Claire wasn't just some random conquest. He targeted her." I frowned, my mind racing. "Targeted her? What are you talking about?" "William has a vendetta," Lydia said, her eyes darkening. "Years ago, your company beat his in a major contract bid. It crippled his business, cost him millions. He blamed you. When he found out you and Claire were married, he saw an opportunity for revenge." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You're saying, he seduced Claire to get back at me?" Lydia nodded. "He's done it before. My ex-husband was one of his pawns. William thrives on manipulation, on breaking people. He's meticulous, calculated. But this time, he might have overplayed his hand." I sat back, the room spinning around me. Claire's betrayal had felt personal, intimate. But now it seemed like part of a larger scheme, a cruel game orchestrated by a man I barely knew. The rage I thought had subsided flared anew, hotter and more consuming than before. "Why are you telling me this?" I demanded. "What's in it for you?" Lydia's expression softened. "Because I've been where you are, Mark. I know the pain, the anger. And because William needs to be stopped. He's not just ruining lives, he's dangerous. You have the power to expose him." I left the cafe with my mind ablaze. If what Lydia said was true, then Claire's infidelity wasn't just a betrayal, it was a weapon. And William had wielded it with precision. But I wasn't about to let him win. The next morning, I began my counterattack. With Lydia's help, I pieced together a dossier on William, his pattern of manipulation, the lives he'd destroyed, the businesses he'd undermined. I contacted others who'd been his victims, gathering testimonies, evidence. And then I went public. The exposé hit like a bombshell. News outlets picked up the story, and within days, William's name was plastered across headlines. His reputation crumbled, his clients fled, and his carefully constructed empire began to collapse. But the true surprise came a week later, when Claire showed up at my door. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling, "I had no idea. About William, about any of it. I was a fool, but I wasn't part of his plan. Please, you have to believe me." I studied her face, searching for signs of deceit. She looked different, worn, fragile, but sincere. For the first time since the party, I saw a glimmer of the woman I'd once loved. "Claire," I said quietly, "it doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done. I've moved on." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded, accepting my words. As she turned to leave, I felt a strange sense of closure. The storm had passed, and though the wreckage remained, I had found a way forward. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just justice, it's reclaiming your own life. And for the first time in months, I felt free.